New information about the man who was shot and killed inside a cookie store at the Shops at Redbird in Dallas.
Police say that for years he had a restraining order against the specific female suspect in the story. Amelia Magabro tonight's taken a deeper look into the effectiveness of restraining orders.
The Shops at Redbird reopened for business Wednesday, but the cookies and cream smoothie business still closed. A solemn reminder of the shop owner shot to death Tuesday afternoon. According to police, 44-year-old Rashonda Lowe is accused of shooting and killing 53-year-old Jaime Rocket at a shop inside the mall. According to arrest records, Lowe and Rocket knew each other and spoke at a shop for about an hour before Lowe pulled out a handgun and shot Rocket. Rocket's wife sharing this photo with us. Social media posts painting him as a man beloved in his community who once owned a music shop. Now, I did speak to Rocket's wife briefly over the phone, and she was really still too emotional to talk to us on camera. But what she did say was that her husband actually had a restraining order against Lowe, and that she even told police that for years, Lowe had been harassing and stalking their family.
Doll, I need you to sit down for this one, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you think you know about the people we trust with our deepest secrets. July 1st, 2025, Dallas, Texas, the Shops at Redbird Mall, a place where families come for cookies and smoothies, where kids laugh and parents relax, where a man named Jamie Rocket spent his days serving up sweet treats and sweeter dreams to his community. But that Tuesday afternoon, something bitter walked through those doors, something that would turn sugar into poison, love into murder, healing into destruction. The woman who pulled that trigger wasn't some random stranger off the street. She wasn't some desperate criminal looking for a quick come-up. No, baby. She was someone the community trusted, someone with credentials, someone who was supposed to know better. Rashonda Lowe, 43 years old, licensed clinical social worker, master's degree in counseling. A woman who made her living teaching other people how to process anger, how to handle rejection, how to move on from heartbreak. Chilly. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here's a woman who spent her days in therapy sessions telling people you need to let go. You can't control other people. Healthy boundaries are essential. You know, all that textbook wisdom they say in therapy sessions. But when it came to her own heart, when it came to her own pain, girl, all that education meant absolutely nothing. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about Jamie Rocket, because this man deserves to be remembered for who he was, not just how he died. 53 years old, father, grandfather, husband to a woman who loved him enough to fight for their marriage, owner of cookies and smoothies, a little shop that was more than just a business. It was a community center, a safe space, a place where young people could come and get mentorship along with their milkshakes. Jamie wasn't perfect. None of us are. But this man was trying to live right. He was building something positive, giving back to his community, creating jobs, offering hope. And when his relationship with Rashonda went south, what did he do? He didn't get violent. He didn't get vengeful. He didn't try to destroy her career or drag her name through the mud. He moved on, like a grown man should. He got married, started fresh, built boundaries, even got a restraining order when things got uncomfortable. He was doing everything the right way. But here's where it gets interesting. And here's where we need to have an honest conversation about accountability. Because some folks are asking, was Jamie really as innocent as he seemed? Were there some games being played, some hearts being toyed with? See, there's whispers in the community. Unconfirmed rumors that maybe, just maybe, Jamie wasn't completely done with Rashonda even after he said I do to someone else. Now, I'm not saying it's true, but I'm saying we need to keep it all the way real about something. You cannot play in people's faces and expect them to just smile and take it. If you're married, act married. If you're done with someone, be done. Don't be calling your ex during lunch breaks. If you don't want drama at dinner time, because here's what we know for sure. On the day Rashonda walked into that cookie shop with murder on her mind, she didn't just walk in and start shooting. No, baby, she talked to Jamie for a whole hour. A whole hour. What do you talk about for an hour with someone you supposedly hate? What do you discuss for 60 minutes with a man who has a restraining order against you? That hour is the mystery that nobody wants to address, because it suggests that maybe, just maybe, This situation was more complicated than crazy ex-girlfriend kills innocent man. But let's be crystal clear about something. No matter what games might have been played, no matter what promises might have been broken, no matter what hearts might have been damaged, there is never ever a justification for taking someone's life. Rashonda had choices. She had options. She had resources. She was literally a trained therapist. She knew where to find help. She knew the warning signs. She knew the tools for processing pain. But instead of using her training on herself, she used a gun on him. Instead of seeking the help she clearly needed, she chose violence. Instead of thinking about her children, her career, her future, she chose revenge. And that choice changed everything. For Jamie's family, for her own children, for the community that trusted both of them. Now here's what really gets me heated about this whole situation. And this is something we need to talk about in our community. How many of y'all have been to a therapist? How many of you have sat in that chair, poured out your heart, shared your trauma, trusted this person with your deepest pain? And how many of you ever stopped to ask who is healing the healer? Because baby, this case is showing us something we should have already known. Having a degree doesn't make you emotionally healthy. Having credentials doesn't mean you've done your own inner work. Some of these therapists are just as broken as the people they're trying to fix. Maybe more broken because they're hiding behind that professional mask. Think about it. What kind of person chooses to listen to other people's problems all day? Sometimes it's someone with a genuine calling to help. But sometimes, Chili, it's someone trying to figure out their own mess by studying everyone else's. Rashonda spent her days teaching people about boundaries, but she couldn't respect the boundaries of a man who told her it was over. She helped clients process abandonment issues, but she couldn't handle being abandoned herself. She guided others through heartbreak, but her own heart was so shattered that she thought murder was the answer. And this is where we need to get real about mental health in our community. Because we've been so focused on destigmatizing therapy that we forgot to ask the hard questions. Who's checking on the checkers? Who's monitoring the monitors? Who's healing the healers? Because if we're going to trust these people with our minds, with our children's minds, with our family's deepest secrets, we need to know that they're stable. We need to know that they're not one bad breakup away from a complete breakdown. This case is about more than just one woman's jealousy. It's about more than just one man's tragic death. It's about the systems we trust, the people we elevate, the assumptions we make about education and expertise. It's about the dangerous gap between what someone knows and what someone does. Because Rashonda knew better. She absolutely knew better. But knowing and doing are two completely different things. And when the knowing breaks down, when the training fails, when the mask slips off, what you're left with is just another broken person with too much power and too little self-control. That's the real terror of this story. Not that some random crazy person committed a crime, but that someone we trusted, someone we looked up to, someone we thought was equipped to handle life's challenges, turned out to be the most dangerous person in the room. See, here's the thing about hindsight. It's always 2020. But in this case, the warning signs weren't subtle. They weren't hidden. They were bright red flags waving in everybody's face. The question is, why didn't anybody do anything about it? Let's start with Rashonda's previous relationship. Because baby, if you want to know how someone's gonna treat you, look at how they treated the person before you. There was a man who dated Rashonda before she ever met Jamie, and this brother tried to warn us. He put it all out there on social media after the murder, not to hurt her but to make sense of what had happened. He talked about how Rashonda would call him between therapy sessions, how she would vent about Jamie not doing enough for her children, how she would block and unblock him depending on her mood with Jamie. But here's the part that should have been a billboard-sized red flag. He mentioned toxic situations, police being called, harassment, a cussing out that he said he'd never forget. Girl, when someone tells you their ex is toxic, when police have been called, when there's been harassment, those aren't just relationship hiccups. Those are warning signs written in neon lights. But what did people do with this information? Nothing, because she was educated, because she was a therapist, because she knew the right words to say and the right ways to explain her behavior.
That's the privilege of having credentials, baby. People give you the benefit of the doubt even when your actions are screaming danger. Now let's talk about Jamie's side of this equation, because as much as I sympathize with a man who lost his life, we need to keep it 100 about his choices too. Jamie married his wife. Jamie's wife had to file the restraining order because Rashonda wouldn't leave them alone. That tells us that this wasn't just some woman who couldn't take a hint. This was someone who had escalated to the point where legal intervention was necessary. But here's where it gets messy. If Rashonda was so dangerous that you needed a restraining order, why are you talking to her for an hour on the day she kills you? That doesn't make sense to me. And it shouldn't make sense to you either. Either she's dangerous and you protect yourself, or she's not dangerous and you don't need legal protection. You can't have it both ways. This is where we need to have an uncomfortable conversation about mixed signals, about the games that people play even when they know better. I'm not saying Jamie deserved to die. He absolutely did not. But I am saying that when you're dealing with someone who's already shown unstable behavior, you don't engage, you don't entertain, you don't give them hope where there is none. Because unstable people take any attention as affection, any conversation as connection, any engagement as encouragement. And if Jamie was still somehow involved with Rashonda while married to someone else, then we need to call that what it is, playing with fire. Now let's talk about that restraining order, because this is where the system failed everybody involved.
Now, I did speak to Rocket's wife briefly over the phone, and she was really still too emotional to talk to us on camera. But what she did say was that her husband actually had a restraining order against Lowe, and that she even told police that for years, Lowe had been harassing and stalking their family.
A restraining order is supposed to be protection. It's supposed to create distance. It's supposed to send a clear message. Stay away. But restraining orders are just paper, baby. They're not force fields. They're not bulletproof vests. They're legal documents that only work if the person they're written against respects the law. And when someone is spiraling mentally, when someone is past the point of rational thinking, a piece of paper means absolutely nothing. The tragic truth is that restraining orders often escalate situations instead of calming them down, because they represent rejection in the most official way possible. They're a public declaration that you're so dangerous, so unwanted, that the courts had to step in. For someone who's already struggling with abandonment issues, a restraining order can feel like the ultimate abandonment. And for someone who's trained to understand psychology, like Rashonda was, it can feel like a direct challenge to their intelligence and their expertise. Think about it, you're a therapist who specializes in helping people work through relationship problems, and your own ex gets a court order to keep you away. That's not just personal rejection, that's professional humiliation. But instead of taking that as a wake-up call, instead of recognizing that maybe she needed help, Rashonda took it as a declaration of war. And that brings us to July 1st, 2025, the day everything came to a head. Rashonda didn't just wake up that morning and decide to commit murder. This was planned. This was calculated. This was the result of months, maybe years of building resentment and fantasy. She drove to that mall with a gun. She knew where Jamie worked. She knew when he'd be there. She knew what she was going to do. The surveillance cameras caught her arriving at 2:35 in the afternoon, not rushing, not panicked, deliberate. She walked into that cookie shop like she belonged there, like she had every right to be there, despite the restraining order, despite the clear message that she was not welcome. And then she talked to Jamie for an hour. An hour, y'all. 60 minutes. That's not a quick conversation. That's not a brief confrontation. That's a sustained interaction between two people who had history. What were they talking about? What was Jamie thinking during that conversation? Did he know he was in danger? Did he think he could talk her down? Did he think he could handle the situation? We'll never know, because the only person who can tell us is dead. But here's what we do know.
At some point during that hour, Rashonda pulled out a gun and started shooting. She didn't shoot once and run. She didn't shoot in the heat of passion and immediately regret it. She shot Jamie multiple times, and when he fell behind the counter, she jumped over and shot him again at close range. That's not a crime of passion, baby. That's execution. That's someone making sure their target doesn't survive. That's someone who had moved beyond anger into pure hatred. After she was done, she left the gun and walked out, got in her white SUV and drove away, like she had just finished running errands. But here's the part that really gets me. Later that same day, she walked into the Arlington Police Department and turned herself in. When they asked her what happened, she said it was a domestic situation with her ex and made a hand gesture indicating she had shot someone.
Investigators say that Lowe later turned herself into Arlington police. When they asked what for, Lowe told them it was a domestic situation with her ex, making a hand gesture indicating that she had shot someone. She has been charged with murder.
Chile. The audacity, the complete disconnect from reality. She described executing a man as a domestic situation. That's not the language of someone who's remorseful. That's not the reaction of someone who just had a mental breakdown. That's someone who felt justified in what they did. That's someone who thought they were right.
And that's the scariest part of this whole story, because we can deal with people who know they're wrong. We can work with people who feel guilt and remorse. But how do you reason with someone who thinks murder was the appropriate response to being rejected? How do you rehabilitate someone who used their professional knowledge not to heal but to destroy? How do you trust a system that gave this woman the credentials to counsel others when she couldn't counsel herself? These are the questions that should be keeping us up at night, because Rashonda Lowe wasn't an anomaly. She wasn't a one-off case of a professional gone wrong. She's a symptom of a bigger problem, a warning sign that we need to pay attention to. Because if someone with a master's degree in counseling, someone who dedicated their career to understanding human behavior, someone who was supposed to be an expert in emotional regulation, could snap this completely, then what does that say about the rest of us? What does that say about the people we're trusting with our mental health? What does that say about the systems we think are protecting us? It's not just about Jamie Rockett's life. It's not just about Rashonda Lowe's choices. It's about everybody else who got caught in the crossfire of one woman's inability to let go. Let's start with the children, because babies, this is where my heart truly breaks. Rashonda had children, children who looked up to her, children who depended on her, children who needed their mother to be the stable, rational, healing force in their lives. One of her children had already lost their father. Can you imagine that pain? Growing up without a dad, and then watching your mother, the one person who's supposed to protect you from the world's chaos, become the chaos herself. These babies didn't ask for any of this. They didn't choose to have a mother who couldn't handle rejection. They didn't sign up to have their lives destroyed because mama couldn't move on from a man who didn't want her. Now they're growing up with the knowledge that their mother is a killer, that the woman who was supposed to teach them right from wrong chose the most wrong thing possible. Do you know what that does to a child's psyche? Do you understand the therapy they're going to need, the shame they're going to carry, the questions they're going to have about whether they inherited their mother's instability? Rashonda was so focused on what Jamie wouldn't give her children that she didn't think about what she was taking away from them. Their mother, their sense of security, their ability to trust that the adults in their lives will make good decisions. She chose a man who didn't want her over children who needed her, and that's unforgivable. But it's not just Rashonda's children who are suffering. Jamie left behind family too, a wife who loved him enough to fight for their marriage, children and grandchildren who looked up to him, a community that depended on him. His wife has to live with the knowledge that she tried to protect her husband, and it wasn't enough. She filed that restraining order. She did everything the system told her to do, and it still didn't save him. That survivor's guilt that's going to haunt her forever. The constant wondering, what if I had done more? What if I had insisted he close the shop that day? What if I had been there? And the community at Redbird Mall. They lost more than just a business owner. They lost a mentor, a safe space, a man who believed in second chances and invested in young people. Those teenagers who worked at cookies and smoothies don't just have to deal with their boss being murdered. They have to deal with the fact that it happened at their workplace, that their safe space became a crime scene. Some of them were probably there that day. Can you imagine the trauma, the nightmares, the way every argument, every raised voice, every tense moment is going to trigger them for the rest of their lives? This is the ripple effect of violence, baby. It doesn't just hurt the immediate victims. It spreads out like a stone thrown in water, touching everyone in its path. Now let's talk about the professional fallout, because this case has implications that go way beyond one woman's breakdown. How many people were in therapy with Rashonda? How many vulnerable individuals trusted her with their deepest fears, their relationship problems, their struggles with letting go? What does it do to your healing process when you find out your therapist was everything she told you not to be? When you realize the person teaching you about healthy boundaries had no boundaries herself? Some of those clients are probably questioning every piece of advice she gave them, every breakthrough they thought they had, every moment of healing they experienced under her guidance. That's professional malpractice on a level we don't even have words for, because it's not just about incompetence. It's about betrayal of the deepest trust possible. And what about other therapists? Other mental health professionals who are doing the work the right way, who have done their own healing and maintain appropriate boundaries with their clients. Now they have to deal with clients who are going to question their stability. Patients who are going to wonder, are you going to snap too? Are you secretly as broken as Rashonda was? That's damage to an entire profession. That's trust that's going to take years to rebuild. But here's where we need to get real about something that nobody wants to talk about. This case is revealing some uncomfortable truths about how we handle mental health in the Black community. We've spent so much time fighting the stigma around therapy that we might have swung too far in the other direction. We're telling people to get therapy without asking enough questions about who's providing it. We're elevating therapists like they're saviors without acknowledging that they're human beings with their own struggles and limitations. We're putting too much faith in degrees and credentials, and not enough emphasis on character and accountability. Because let's be honest, how many of us have met therapists who seemed more troubled than their clients? How many of us have sat across from mental health professionals who clearly hadn't done their own inner work? I'm not saying don't go to therapy. I'm saying be discerning about who you trust with your mind. Ask questions. Pay attention to red flags. Remember that a degree doesn't automatically make someone emotionally healthy. And if you're a mental health professional yourself, please get your own therapy. Get supervision, have accountability partners, because the people who trust you deserve better than what Rashonda gave her community. This case is also forcing us to have harder conversations about domestic violence and stalking. Because that's what this was, even though Rashonda was a woman and Jamie was a man. Stalking doesn't always look like someone hiding in bushes or following you home. Sometimes it looks like someone who won't accept that the relationship is over. Someone who keeps finding reasons to contact you. Someone who makes you feel like you need legal protection. And domestic violence isn't always physical. It's emotional manipulation. It's refusing to respect boundaries. It's making someone fear for their safety even when you haven't laid a hand on them. We need to recognize these patterns regardless of gender. We need to take threats seriously, regardless of who's making them. And we need to understand that education and professional status don't make someone less dangerous. Actually, they might make them more dangerous, because they know how to manipulate the system. They know the right words to say to make themselves look like the victim. They know how to weaponize their knowledge and their reputation. So what lessons can we take from this tragedy? What changes can we make to honor Jamie's memory and protect future victims? First, we need better screening for mental health professionals. Not just educational requirements, but psychological evaluations, regular check-ins, mandatory therapy for therapists. Second, we need to improve our domestic violence prevention systems. Restraining orders need to come with more robust protection. Law enforcement needs better training on escalation patterns. Third, we need to have honest conversations in our community
about accountability, about the difference between supporting someone through struggles and enabling destructive behavior. And finally, we need to teach our children, especially our daughters, that love should never cost you your freedom, your sanity, or your life. That walking away from someone who doesn't want you isn't giving up, it's growing up. Because at the end of the day, this whole tragedy could have been prevented with one simple decision: letting go. If Rashonda had chosen healing over revenge, therapy over violence, her children's future over her own pain, Jamie Rocket would still be alive today. Her children would still have their mother. The community would still have their safe space. But she made a different choice. She chose destruction over healing. She chose possession over love. She chose to be remembered as a killer instead of a healer. And now everyone has to live with the consequences of that choice. Everyone except Jamie, who doesn't get to live at all. This is why these stories matter, y'all. Not for the shock value or the entertainment, but for the warnings they carry, the lessons they teach, the conversations they start. If just one person watches this and decides to seek help instead of seeking revenge, if just one person recognizes the warning signs in themselves or someone they love, if just one potential victim gets the protection they need, then telling this story was worth it. Because Jamie Rocket deserved better. His family deserves better. His community deserves better. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn from his death how to protect life better in the future. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Deadly Affairs. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case, what questions you still have, what lessons you're taking away. But remember to keep it respectful. Real people were hurt by this tragedy. Real families are still healing from this loss. And y'all, if this story opened your eyes to something you didn't see before, if it made you think differently about the people you trust, or the red flags you might be ignoring, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to Deadly Affairs so you don't miss any of these stories that need to be told. Because every like, every subscription, every share helps us reach someone who might need to hear these warnings. Someone who might recognize themselves in these situations. Someone who might make different choices because they learned from someone else's tragedy. These aren't just stories for entertainment, baby. These are lessons wrapped in heartbreak. Wake-up calls written in blood. And the more people who hear them, the more lives we might be able to save. Until next time, pay attention to the red flags, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous person is the one who looks the safest. This has been Deadly Affairs. Stay safe out there.